Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to take a look at what's new in the latest release of Creo, which is version Creo 11. My name is Rob Romanowski. I'm the Director of Sales Operations with 3HTI, and I'm glad you could all spend a little time today to get to know a little bit more about Creo. I hope you guys find this webinar helpful and informative. That's the whole point of why we have our webinar series, is because we want people to be educated and to get any help that they need regarding Creo, Windchill, or any other PTC solutions. So leading the presentation today and the overview and the demo portions is Andrea Francis, who is a solutions consultant with PTC's Virtual Center of Excellence and also an applications engineer. If you have any questions, type those into the chat box. We will try to answer them as we go, but we'll definitely answer all those at the end of the webinar. So we're probably going to be about 30 minutes, maybe a little more, because there's quite a bit to cover, and we'll be recording this. And without further ado, Andrea, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. And welcome, everyone. As Rob said, my name is Andrea Francis. I'm a solutions consultant at PTC. And today we'll be walking through what's new in the latest version of Creo, which is Creo 11. In terms of the topics that we're going to cover today, there are a few areas that we're going to go over, starting with some productivity and usability enhancements, some design for electrification, composites, model-based definition, simulation-driven design, and design for manufacturing. And to get things started, we're getting started with the productivity and usability areas. Now, within that space, we have a few enhancements in various different key areas inside of Creo. If we get started with just usability items to start. In Creo, we've had the command finder for a really long time, which was that top right-hand corner search bar. You would be able to go in and search for commands inside of the system, and it would highlight those commands or the locations of those commands for you. In Creo 11, we've taken that same behavior today with the configuration and the options dialogues. You can go in now, type in the name of that option that you want to change, and it would highlight it for you in your panels. And that also applies to other items like the config.pro settings as well. So it's much more easier to search for your different items as you're going through your config dialog. There's been improvements on the drag handles. It's much more easier to manipulate, move around, seeing if you're doing a linear sort of drag or angular dimensions. It's much more easily manipulated inside of Creo. And then even on the side of the model tree, we've made improvements for the expanding and collapsing features. You can now collapse all your features, and it doesn't just go to the base node, but it goes to the base assembly. And then even on the renaming side of things, this has been something that a lot of people have struggled with for quite a while with Creo. When you have a conflict, if you put a space, for example, while you're renaming, it would revert back to the old name because it doesn't accept that inside of Creo. But now you get that message telling you, hey, you have a conflict, you have an error, and it will keep your input panel opened up for you, highlighted, so you can make the change necessary when you're renaming. On the side of selections, there's quite a few improvements around selections. First, around we've added some support for box, lasso, and trace selections for surface collectors. Users can now go in and choose the option from that bottom right-hand corner, and then choose to either draw a box or lasso or even trace around the surfaces that they would want to select. And that option allows them to even select both visible only surfaces or all of the surfaces that they have on their models. The default primary selection option has always been one for surfaces with the history of Creo. We've had quite a lot of feedback in the recent years of adding the option to pick quilts as that primary selection. A lot of users use quilts, they prefer working with quilts and have them as their primary design. They would prefer to have it as a primary option for selection as well, and now they're able to do that in Creo 11. And then finally, on the side of curves, we've made improvements for composite curves. You're now able to go in, pick your composite curve or even the full chain of that curve versus just the individual pieces. So it's much more easier now to manipulate those curves, your surfaces, and work with them while you're selecting that information. On the side of multi-body, now the large productivity improvement in Creo 11 is with the introduction of multi-body support for sheet metal. Back in Creo 7, we added multi-body support for solid bodies, and we've made continuous improvement on it since then. But we've added the ability now to do sheet metal and multi-body in that same part. You can have multiple different sheet metal components all within a singular part, split it in, split, let's say, a sheet metal part into several or even multiple sheet metal parts and solid bodies all within an individual part. And what this results in is you can have, let's say, multiple different thicknesses of your sheet metal body all within a part. You have a much more larger spectrum of use cases that you can have. You can do same thickness parts, multiple thickness parts, use both multi-body and sheet metal for even top-down design as you're working inside of Creo. We've expanded shrink wrap capabilities. So shrink wrap is the ability that allows you to take your multiple components in an assembly and create a singular body by reducing that complexity or even the amount of the geometry that you have. And it can be done in multiple different ways. In Creo 11, we've added the capability to bring in bodies. If, let's say, you have an assembly that has multiple different bodies, you can now bring those bodies into an individual single for the shrink wrap. You can merge those bodies together all within a singular body, or you can even merge all of the assembly components into that singular body. You have a lot of options there. With modeling, we've made a bit of enhancements in there. We've first of all made enhancements to the enclosure volume tool. A few releases ago with Creo, we've added that ability to create enclosure volumes, mainly for flow analysis, even for packaging, you can use it. And when we created it, it was an associated feature. So if you made any changes to, let's say, the model or to the part, it wouldn't update. That volume enclosure would not update. You would need to have to redefine it and recalculate it. We've now changed that behavior with Creo 11. It acts now as all of the other features in Creo. It regenerates, it recalculates automatically, and you can optimize for it. With the optimization, you had some optimization capabilities in the other releases where you can minimize or build the smallest cube around that shape that you would pick for it. But now you can optimize for the orientation as well. It works both in your part and your assembly mode. And you can pick that geometry or the surface to either include and exclude for the optimization. Maybe you're including some side or some surface of that model versus all of it, and you're able to work around it in various different ways. With patterns, we've added the new from pattern option for point patterns. This allows you to define a point pattern from the point locations or even coordinate systems that are being taken from a selected pattern of data points. It could be a selection of patterns of your coordinate systems or even a selected pattern containing any of them combined together. You're going to be able to create your pattern faster and that way have them even regenerate faster. That's why this is an enhancement that we've made. It's been requested a lot over the years. It's much more quicker to define as many points as you'd like, as many patterns as you'd like, and you're even able to define the from pattern capability as identical, which you couldn't do before. On the welding side, we've introduced the concept of joint bodies. Joint bodies are a way for you to identify which components you want to perform a weld operation. In the case of spot welding, if you have 5 or 6 components in your assembly, but the first operation is, let's say, to spot weld component 1 to 2, and then you would take component 3, spot weld it onto that. those joint bodies will show up in a new weld tree that we have where you can see each individual body. You can activate each one of them, work on them, and the spot welds are going to be part of the joint body that you would have. You have the ability to even export out the spot welding information into your XMCF file format and then use it as well for other purposes. We've made enhancements to core capabilities, mainly focusing around the offset edge, edge chain, and even the intent chain references. You have the ability now to offset quotes. And we've added now that ability to solid bodies. If you imagine, let's say, the edge of a sheet metal part, and you want to spot weld at an offset of that edge, with this ability, you're able to easily create an offset curve and then spot weld directly on. And even on the side of projection, you can now create a series of sketch points and project those directly onto the geometry for welding purposes. From a surfacing perspective, we have some freestyle enhancements and then some style enhancements, which we can go over in the next slide. But we've made continuous improvements on both freestyle and style. Back in Creo 10, we added the ability to create rotational geometry inside of freestyle. Now in Creo 11, we've still expanded on that after making your rotational pattern inside of freestyle and you're able to come out of that freestyle. It is now recognized as a pattern that you can perform a reference pattern on with other operations. There's a new bevel command in freestyle, which is very similar to chamfers. It will help you to alter the topology of the control mesh that you would have to give you just a chamfer or a round type of geometry. And it will give you that flexibility to quickly alter the topology of your model, add sharper edges, blend out from, let's say, a fillet type geometry to a non-fillet type geometry much more smoother. And then there's been improved usability for the multi-level subdivisional capabilities. This will allow you to display the level of resolution inside of your freestyle tree of just for visitors. On the side of style enhancement, we've expanded the curve capabilities inside of style. Previously, you would not be able to alter the degree of your curve. The minimum degree that was supported was degree 3, but with Creo 11, you can now go below that. You can make something like a degree 2 curve, which would be like a conic curve, and a degree 1, which would essentially be a line. But you're able to go below that previous minimum degree, which there's more intuitive curve editing. If you go in and let's say modify the tangency on one end of the curve, previously the other end would remain fixed. You would go in and have to manually modify that tangency. Instead, now the other end will be automatically modified as part of that curve editing. And connection tables. We've added connection tables with Creo 11. If let's say you're defining a connection between different surfaces, you can have a table that will show you what your boundaries are, what it's connected to, what the constraints type are, and you can have those be displayed out for you. That's it on the productivity and usability side of things. Rob, do you see any questions in the chat up until now, or should we go to electrification?
There are no questions at this time. We'll keep moving.
Cool. Then on the side of cabling, we focused on cleaning up a lot of the cabling capabilities in Creo 11. First of all, we've modernized the remove location menu command. That used to have a really old menu, but we've now modernized it, added more options to it, like dynamic previews, better filtering, undo and redo support capabilities, and even for the cabling tree. In Creo 10, we've introduced that notion of having a cabling tree inside of Creo to manage all of your different cables. And in Creo 11, we've added additional capabilities, mainly around filtering and going through that table. And then there's some productivity enhancements with cabling, mainly around visibility controls for that cabling tree, and even added supports for your cosmetic features, such as having your cable ties not be shown in the cabling tree, so just so you have better visibility if it's too blurred onto your model. For ECAD support, as you bring in your ECAD data inside of Creo, there's now controls to control, let's say, the colors that you're bringing in, the visibility, the transparent of each item that you would have. And in this way, you have better control on what you're deciding to bring in inside of Creo for your ECAD data. Now, the next section is all focused on design for composites. Back in Creo 10, we introduced the ability to do composite design, analysis, and manufacturing. In Creo 11, we're continuing on looking at feedback from our customer base and even from our internal team of engineers on what more improvements can we do, because it is a new tool that we had introduced back in Creo 10. In Creo 11, we focused on three main areas for composites. First of all, expanding the functionality. For the transitions specifically, we improved how you're going to be able to use them. You can modify transitions now in your graphics area. For the laminate section, we've added cross-highlighting between your plies in the graphics area and the tree, so you can now individually select plies from either side, and they can cross-highlight, interact with each other, so you know what you're selecting onto your model versus how it appears onto your laminate tree. And then for draping simulation, we've improved the algorithm that does the calculations for the draping. You can now see the flat plies in a separate window, which is very similar to how you would do it with sheet metal, where you can see the unbent state in a separate window. That gives you that ability to see your flat ply as you're working on your draping simulations. The second area, which is one of the most requested features for composites so far, has been how do we automate the creations of plies and cores inside of Creo? And what we've introduced in Creo 11 is this new concept for zone-based design. Back in Creo 10, you would be able to go in and manually lay up all of your different plies, create them one by one, and depending on how many you have, that could be a hassle. But we've now introduced that notion where you can segment your model in different zones, and each zone you can specify which or what your ply stack of is going to be within that zone. Essentially, what you're going to be doing is you're going to define a zone stack up. That could be an area within that model, and have it be saved to your disk. It will tell you how many plies that you have, the order, the orientation. But once you have your zones laid out, you would apply what is called a zone stack up to each of these zones. And in this way, it will allow you to build up hundreds of plies in your result is going to be automatically defining your zone stackups in each zone, automatically building all of these different plies, build your entire laminate in there, have it be modifiable if needed, reuse the information, and even have it tied back to your different simulations. And the third area within the design for composites is manufacturing. When it comes to manufacturing your designs, manufacturing your composites, typically you would need to take your plies and extend them out for your molds. We've added capabilities to extend your ply boundary beyond where they're going to be set. They'll extend within that realm of your mold surface to keep your design consistent. There's also an ability for core sampling. This is going to allow you to pick any point onto your model and will tell you at that point what your plies, what the core material is, what the order underneath that point is. And then we've added support for laser projection files. We support now the two leading laser projection system, Lab and Vertec. This is an export format that's going to allow you to export in specific formats or the standard of the ply information, boundaries, your seed points, orientation, your rosettes, and we're doing it based on the uncured thickness. So this is so that the projection is correct, accurate for the uncured material as you're laying it up. Next, let's talk about the model-based definition enhancements. First is around tables. The main focus for us in Creo 11 with model-based definition was the support for tables. You can now go in and create simple tables similar to how you're creating a table in PowerPoint. You would define the number of rows, the number of columns, even pick tables from existing ones that are available. But you can lay up or place that table either flat on the screen or on your annotation plane for your 3D model. And then you would have the controls to scale it up and down, drag your individual columns and rows like you're working within PowerPoint. So it's really simple to use, but you can put in your different parameters, call outs, or even your semantic information and references. And for now, with Creo 11, we're only supporting simple tables, but with future releases of Creo, we'll be working on supporting repeat regions as well for that. With the GD&T advisor, we continue to still make improvements on it. This is an extension that gives expert guidance on the application of geometric, dimensioning, and tolerance information. First, what we've done with it is we've added support for the ISO GPD 220A1 for general tolerancing. You can now define your general tolerancing for linear, angular, and general profile tolerances. And the purpose here is to set standard rules as you're working on your GD&T callouts. We've added the ability to combine information on simple holes and even make a single callout for that. Sometimes when you're creating holes, a lot of the creation elements, it could be multiple elements that you're using to create those holes. And each of these elements have their own properties that usually are displayed out in multiple different annotations. You would display those individually and it would clutter your screen. It wouldn't really be efficient for your MBD work. But now in Creo 11, you can choose how you want to display those annotations. You can choose to display them still individually, but you can even combine them into a single callout for all of the ISO holes that you have. And finally, we've enriched the support for your slab install feature in your GD&T advisor, and also the tapered slab install features as you would need it. Any questions at all so far? Or
Questions at this time, Andrea?
okay, cool. Then let's go into discussing some of the enhancements to simulations, simulation-driven design, and the different tools that we have inside of Creo. And let's start with Creo Simulation Live. Now, the main enhancement with the Creo Simulation Live is we've added the ability to do conjugate heat transfer. And what this means now is you can evaluate the effect of your heat flow in your design. We've expanded the types of the results that you can obtain and display for both your structural and your fluid results. And we're staying up to date as well with the latest solvers of ANSYS with Creo Simulation Live as we are working with this new version of Creo. With Creo ANSYS simulation, we've added a strong capability in the advanced package, which is transient structural studies. Now, what this means is you can do your structural simulations that are time dependent. There are a few controls to support that too, like having your step durations, your sub-stepping, your initial velocities, your damping. And this will include the ability to even define your constraints as a function of time. And overall, what we're doing here is we're giving you that ability to run multi-step structural simulation on your different types of models. So a lot of expanded abilities within a Creo ANSYS simulation. With generative design, the first ability is the new control to define the minimum thickness. If you're building something like a rib, as an example, you can say what the minimum size of that rib is going to be and have it generate for you the design based on that. You can do it in multiple areas, use it with something like additive manufacturing, with casting, and you even have the ability to do some bearing loads as well. You can explicitly define what the bearing load is when you're defining your studies. And even on the side of your planar symmetries, which was introduced back in Creo 10, we've expanded on that ability for restriction purposes specifically. When you're reconstructing your B-rep surface or your facet geometry for your model, planar symmetry can now be considered with the reconstruction. And finally, let's take a look at the design for manufacturing enhancements. First of all, for lattices, we've added a new type of lattice, which is connection lattices. And what these will do is, as you can see onto the video that's playing right now on this slide, it allows you to take two or more beam-based lattices and merge them together into a single connected lattice. It's the best way to connect your different lattices together. You're able to merge them, have them be connected appropriately based on their structure and the way that they are modeled. With beam lattices, we've also made improvements for stochastic lattices. We took that randomization option and made it available as a parameter such that it can be used in something like a family table. We've also added pore size definition, and this is going to be very important in various different industries. And one that I can think of right now is the medical industry. When, let's say, you're building something like an implant and you need to have the correct pore size to allow bone regrowth, well, you can define that pore size now for your different lattices. If you're working on something like a filter for a vehicle, that can be used to define the minimum size of the particle that the fluid will go through, right? So you can use it in various different ways for your different lattices as you're building them out. We've also added the ability to do warp capabilities for your beam lattices, so you can manipulate, stretch those out, twist them around. And there's also exporting capabilities to, let's say, export your 3MF file or STL file formats when you're in part mode for your different lattices. With high-speed machining, we've added the support for two new 4-axis rotary machining capabilities: roughing and finishing tool paths. The tool paths that you can build can now pass 360 degrees, and there's support for end mills, ball mills, bullnose mills, as you would need it for those different operations. With milling, we've expanded the trajectory tool milling tool paths. We have the ability now to have a tangent entry and exit option when you're creating a trajectory mill that is normal to your surface. We've added axis control when you're doing a 4 or a 5 trajectory mill. You'll have the option to use a curve that doesn't necessarily lie on the surface of your machine, and this will help to improve the control of your orientation of your tool as you're setting all of those up inside of Creo. We also did some work on the retract motion. You have the ability to trim the retract to a plane. And what this means is if you're, let's say, speeding up the machine operation, you can trim it to a plane, retract it at a given speed, and it's going to retract that plane that to that plane that you've defined. And once it gets past that, it will go back into rapid motion smooth. From a visibility and usability perspective, we've added the controls to turn off different types of items that you have as well. It could get really cluttered when you're setting up all of your different operations, all of the different tool paths. If you have your mill volumes, your mill windows, your mill surfaces, your different turn profiles, you now have the ability to turn them on and off when needed. And then finally, with turning, we've worked on a few capabilities to improve for turning with Creo 11. First, we've modernized the 4-axis area turn. It's now a lot more consistent. It's a much more modern dashboard, like all of the other tool paths that we have. And we have improved the material removal capabilities for turning profiles. Specifically, when you're creating a turning profile into disconnected areas of the model. There's a series of turning capabilities that we had introduced for 2-axis back in Creo 10. Well, we've now added them in Creo 11 to the 4-axis. We can now specify something like cutter compensation per slice, the better control over the clearance distance, better entry and exit controls for the toolpaths. And that's a lot. There's a lot of those capabilities that we have with Creo 11. We've made, as you can see, a lot of improvements in many different areas. Some of them are significant improvements based on feedback. So as you work through our software, let us know if you have any feedback on any improvements that we have. So yeah, that's really all the improvements on there. Any questions or anything?
Andrea, thank you very much for a very thorough and a great job as always with this review. So I'm going to have this recording uploaded within the next day or two, and I will send a link to our YouTube page and link directly to this video so you can watch it again at your leisure, and feel free to share it with anybody else within your organization. If you think of anything later as far as you want to see a more detailed demo regarding Creo 11 or anything else Creo or Windchill, you can just reply to the email that was sent, the invitation that was sent, that will come back to me, and we can set up a more detailed demonstration for you. Or you can info or contact us at info at 3HTI. So Andrea, thank you very much. I appreciate you leading the webinar today. And most importantly, I appreciate everybody who was on today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the week. And we look forward to seeing you again soon for our webinar series. Thanks. Take care.